Good evening from New York. First, BP and the government told us that oil was gushing into the Gulf at the rate of 1,000 barrels a day. On April 27th, the environmental group SkyTruth used satellite imagery to estimate the flow at 5 times faster, 5,000 barrels a day. The next day, over BP's objections, the government raised its estimate to 5,000 barrels. Today, in our fifth story, 3 separate research scientists telling National Public Radio, using calculations based on new video of the gushing pipe, they estimate that the rate is 10 times faster, at least 56,000 barrels a day, possibly as many as 84,000. Meaning, if true, this spill has been producing the equivalent of the Exxon Valdez spill every 5 days. The researchers calculating independently based on new video showing the oil's release from a 21-inch pipe 5,000 feet down, some of it apparently methane, most of it clearly crude. The New York Times reporting that the administration got its 5,000 barrel figure using a formula explicitly not recommended for large spills, and that BP has, without explanation, decided not to have 2 veteran analysts measure this one. The president today said stopping it is what matters and criticized the executives responsible.
I have to say, though, I did not appreciate what I considered to be a ridiculous spectacle during the congressional hearings into this matter. You had executives of BP and Transocean and Halliburton falling over each other to point the finger of blame at somebody else. The American people could not have been impressed with that display, and I certainly wasn't.
As yet another regulatory failure came to light, Mr. Obama also blamed the federal government. The New York Times reporting that MMS, the Interior Department agency responsible for oversight on drilling, violated environmental laws by approving leases, including the one spilling now, without getting permits from environmental agencies. Mr. Obama blamed a decade of MMS coziness with big oil, neglecting to mention that the Interior Secretary, Ken Salazar, was applauded by big oil when Mr. Obama chose him to fix these problems. President Obama today putting Salazar front and center at his meeting today on the spill and charging Salazar again to fix those problems after almost a year and a half of his having failed to do so.
For too long, for a decade or more, there's been a cozy relationship between the oil companies and the federal agency that permits them to drill. It seems as if permits were too often issued based on little more than assurances of safety from the oil companies. That cannot and will not happen anymore. To borrow an old phrase, we will trust, but we will verify. Now, from the day he took office as Interior Secretary, Ken Salazar has recognized these problems, and he's worked to solve them.
Since Mr. Obama and Mr. Salazar took office, the MMS has approved 3 massive leases and 346 drilling plans without getting the environmental permits required by federal law, so reports the New York Times. While BP tries 2 separate methods on 2 of the gushing holes down in the Gulf, one the so-called top hat to cap and funnel the leak, the other a smaller pipe inserted into the main gushing pipe, new drilling has already begun in the same oil field to vent the oil in controlled fashion before it reaches that breach. The oil industry newspaper Upstream reporting that work on the relief well was stalled so that its blowout preventer, the same kind of device that failed to stop the original spill, could itself undergo a battery of tests based on new protocols from MMS. BP telling Countdown tonight the relief well drilling will resume this weekend, but when we asked whether government regulators had overseen the design, the construction, the testing, or the installation of the relief well's blowout preventer, BP spokesman John Crabtree said, "I assume they did. I don't know." And whether this or a second relief well to be drilled will employ acoustic switches, backup devices for activating blowout preventers remotely, Crabtree saying also, "I don't know." The MMS not replying at all today to the same set of questions supplied by Countdown earlier. We're joined now by Democratic Congressman Earl Blumenauer of Oregon, Vice Chair of the House Select Committee on Energy Independence and Global Warming. Congressman, thanks for your time tonight.
Always my pleasure, Keith.
Should we not know whether or not 2 new rigs operated by Transocean, contracted for by BP, are going to use those acoustic switches, or whether or not the blowout preventers are going to be up to snuff, not to mention whether or not the cementing process will be better? How is it that not you, not I, not BP, maybe not MMS, can answer any of these questions at this point?
It's appalling, isn't it? You would think that in the aftermath of this disaster, which clearly represents multiple failures, that we would be much more aggressive to make sure that we know the fundamentals.
We're now 1/3 of the way through the president's presumably first term. If Mineral Management Service still needs fixing, in your opinion, why does the president think the last two-thirds would be different under the same guy supervising this?
I share your frustration, but in all fairness to the president, this is a hopelessly flawed system. We saw in the last administration vivid examples where people in MMS were literally in bed with the people that they were supposed to regulate. Snorting cocaine, having sexual affairs. I mean, it is shameful. The administration has a whole series of things that they are seeking to address. I personally think that this is a reason why we should not be going ahead with more offshore drilling till we get it right. But frankly, this is a result of 8 years of disastrous non-oversight and putting people in there who had no business being in charge.
To the question of what to do about drilling in a moment, but let me finish up on the agency here. If it's that corrupted, and your point about literally in bed is absolutely legitimately, verifiably true, would you not need to really go in there and have a team designed to replace that culture of corruption? And I mean, you can't. Is it necessary to do it piecemeal, to accept the idea that there'll be this lingering structure of corruption over a certain period of time?
Well, I mean, they have they've installed there a really very capable woman. The recommendation of the Secretary to split it is wise, I think a little overdue. But I don't disagree with you at all, but there is so much going on that needs to be dealt with. I hope that this is a wake-up call, that we stop moving ahead with these leases, and that there is more attention to getting this right so that we are not moving further over the edge.
About the evolution, finally, Congressman, of this number of how much oil has been gushing. We started at 1,000 barrels a day. Then it was 5,000 barrels a day after the environmental group used the satellite imagery. Now we're hearing from the NPR experts 56,000, 84,000. That's barrels, not gallons. And gallons is closer to 2.9 million gallons a day. Do we have yet any measure of just how bad this is? That 5 times Exxon Valdez, or Exxon Valdez every 5 days, it suggests an environmental disaster. Is the response proportional? Is there something else that should be done? Should we have National Guard troops there? Should we have submarines there? What are we missing? Well,
I mean, your point is spot on. If we are having the equivalent of an Exxon Valdez more than every week, it suggests that it isn't just an incidental question, as BP suggests. Well, we're concerned about stopping it rather than measuring it. If you don't know the magnitude, it really suggests that you may well be hampered in getting it right. And I don't think there's any reason to sugarcoat this for the American public.
Do we need to temporarily shut down and do emergency inspections on all offshore, or at least deep offshore oil rigs at this point?
I mean, I don't want to extend the drilling perimeter at all, and I think it does raise serious questions about what is going on now. If there is such fundamental lack of following the law and the procedures, that routine environmental assessments were not made, that what we just heard a day ago in the Energy and Commerce Committee, that the so-called dead man switch, you know, that's supposed to automatically activate, you had to have 3 separate conditions all simultaneously before it would operate, as opposed to any single one of which ought to push the panic button. It does raise questions about the integrity of what is going on now.
Congressman Earl Blumenauer, Democrat of Oregon. A pleasure, sir. Great. Thanks for your time. Have a good weekend.
Thank you, sir.